I heard tapping from apartment 3A. Now I'm the one behind the wall. Reddit horror story. There's something about old buildings that makes them feel alive, like they're breathing in the secrets of every soul that's ever passed through. Ours was no exception. Weathered bricks, creaky radiators, and paper-thin walls. Apartment 3A always stood out, though. It had that closed-off energy, the kind of place you instinctively walk by a little faster without realizing it, not because of any particular noise or drama. On the contrary, it was too quiet. Eerily so. But that changed in the spring of last year when something started to unravel inside those walls. It began with a sound. Just a sound. A soft, repetitive tapping late at night, like someone drumming their fingers on a table, slow and deliberate. It wasn't loud, but it was rhythmic. I remember lying in bed, eyes wide open, trying to place it. After a few nights, it escalated. The tapping grew louder, then paused for minutes at a time, only to return in short bursts, almost like Morse code. I'd lived in 30B for 5 years and knew every creak, every plumbing moan, every elevator jolt, but this was new. It wasn't the kind of sound you ignored. It was the kind that asked for attention. People said the woman in 3A kept to herself. Her name was Mrs. Calderon. 70s, gray bun, high-collared blouses even in summer. I'd seen her maybe twice in 5 years, always when she was locking her door with almost paranoid precision. She never looked anyone in the eye, just kept her head down and hands trembling slightly. Rumors swirled among neighbors. Widowed decades ago, some said. Others claimed she had a daughter who died tragically, and that's what broke her. But nobody really knew. That's what made the noise so unnerving. It was like the apartment was finally trying to speak. I started making excuses to pass by her door, listening. Sometimes I thought I heard more than tapping. Faint sobs, the shuffling of feet, the creak of a rocking chair. But every time I leaned in, everything stopped. Dead silence. And it stayed that way until I moved away. Or so I thought. Back then, I had a job I hated and a relationship I thought I loved. I wasn't the nosy type, but when things at home started falling apart, missed calls, cold dinners, silences that stretched for days, I found myself drawn more and more to the mystery behind the wall. It was like the drama in 3A gave mine some shape, some contrast, something to focus on besides my crumbling routine. One night, after a particularly heated argument with my boyfriend about something ridiculous, probably dishes, I went into the hallway just to breathe. The air out there always felt different, like it held its breath too. I walked slowly past 3A. That's when I heard it clear as day, a woman's voice, whispering something over and over. I froze. Her voice was hoarse, deliberate, almost chanting. "He knows, he knows, he knows," she repeated. It sent a chill down my spine. I pressed my ear to the door, heart pounding, palms sweaty. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe her muttering to herself, maybe a radio. But what I heard next made my knees lock. A second voice. A man's, deep, measured, and terrifyingly calm. "Then let him come." I stepped back instinctively, almost stumbling, and glanced down the hallway. Empty. I waited silent. Nothing more. Just silence and that oppressive feeling that I had crossed a line I shouldn't have. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I knocked on 3A's door. I told myself it was just neighborly concern, but really I needed to know. The door opened just a crack. Mrs. Calderon peered out, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes were the worst part. Wide, glassy, like they weren't sure if I was real. "Yes," she asked, voice barely a whisper. I stammered something about hearing a noise, just wanted to make sure everything was all right. Her lips twitched. Not a smile, a flicker of something darker. "No noise," she said simply, and shut the door. I should have left it at that, but I couldn't. It was like something had been set in motion, and I was too deep to turn back. I started keeping a notebook, recording the sounds, times, patterns, changes. It wasn't just tapping and whispers anymore. There were thuds, heavy ones, like furniture being moved or something falling, but never any sign of visitors. No footsteps in the hall, no open door. One night the sound stopped altogether, and I thought maybe it was over. But around 3 a.m., a scream ripped through the wall. One short, sharp, inhuman cry. I jumped out of bed and ran to the hallway, heart in my throat. Lights flicked on in other apartments. Doors creaked open, we all heard it. And yet, when we knocked on 3A, no one answered. Eventually, the building manager opened it with a master key. What we found was nothing. No Mrs. Calderon. No signs of a struggle. Just a spotless apartment with plastic-covered furniture and a faint smell of lavender and dust. The rocking chair in the corner was still. The kettle on the stove was cold. Her phone was on the table dead. Her purse sat neatly beside it. But she was gone. The police came. Questions were asked. Cameras were checked. Nothing. No one had seen her leave. No evidence of a break-in. Just vanished. I kept thinking about the second voice, about that sentence. Then let him come. I didn't say anything to the police. What could I say? I had no proof, only late-night whispers and notebook scribbles that made me look more unstable than helpful. After that, something changed in the apartment. Not just 3A. Everywhere. The whole floor felt heavier. Lights flickered more often. My keys would disappear for hours only to turn up in the exact spot I swore I'd looked. Once, I came home to find my window wide open and every drawer in my kitchen slightly ajar. Nothing missing. Nothing broken. Just opened, like someone was searching for something and wanted me to know. 3 weeks later, a letter appeared under my door. No envelope, no stamp. Just a piece of aged paper, folded in half. On it, in shaky handwriting. He never left. The wall is thinner now. I stared at it for hours, replaying every sound, every whisper, every glance at 3A. I didn't know what it meant exactly, but I knew what I had to do. I bought a sledgehammer. It sounds insane, I know. But by then, I had nothing left to lose. My boyfriend had moved out. My job had let me go. I wasn't sleeping, eating, living. Just existing between two walls, waiting for another noise. So, one night, I stood in my living room staring at the wall that connected to 3A. I raised the hammer and struck. Plaster cracked. Dust exploded into the air. I kept going hit after hit until I broke through the drywall. Behind other wall. Older, brick, uneven. But something was scratched into it. Words. I leaned in, brushing the dust away. And there it was, in frantic, looping scripts. I'm still here. Not written once. Written dozens of times, overlapping, scratched deep into the brick like fingernails. I stepped back, chest heaving, as a gust of cold air hit my face, coming from the crack I'd made. Not possible. There was no vent there. No draft. But the air smelled sweet. Rotten sweet. Like flowers left too long in water. I reached out foolishly and placed my palm against the wall. It was warm, pulsing, like a heart. That's when the whisper came again. Right behind the wall. You found me. I stumbled back, dropped the hammer, and the last thing I remember before blacking out was a shadow curling out from the crack, impossibly slow, impossibly long. When I woke, morning sunlight flooded the room. The wall was intact. No cracks, no writing, no hole. Just drywall, smooth and undisturbed. The hammer was gone. I never told anyone. No one would believe it. Not even myself, most days. But I still live here, still in 30B. And sometimes when the nights are long and the air is thick, I hear the tapping again. Faint, deliberate, calling someone else. And I pray every time it isn't me. The apartment manager swore he'd patched the wall years ago. That's solid, reinforced, he'd muttered when I asked him, eyes darting nervously as if he could still hear echoes from 3A. But I didn't care what he remembered. I knew what I saw, or thought I saw. After that night, something shifted in me. Not just mentally, emotionally, too. I stopped questioning my sanity and started accepting a strange truth. Whatever lived in 3A hadn't left. It had simply changed form. And I wasn't the first to notice. Others began talking, cautiously at first, like testing the air for static. One neighbor, a retired teacher who lived in 30C, admitted she hadn't slept in days. She said her radio turned on by itself at 3:07 every morning, playing the same hymn her mother used to sing before she died. Another, a young couple across the hall, claimed their baby monitor picked up a lullaby in Spanish, soft and sorrowful, though neither of them spoke the language and no one nearby did either. Still, no one reported anything officially. A fear does that. It turns confident adults into secret keepers, silent accomplices in their own haunting. I became obsessed with unraveling it all. I dug into property records, found old floor plans, tracked down previous tenants of 3A. Most didn't answer. 2 numbers were disconnected. One woman agreed to meet, Anna Morales. She'd lived in 3A in the early 90s with her husband and their son. When we met, she was already trembling before I asked anything. You heard the whispers, didn't you? She said before I even opened my mouth. Her eyes were hollow as if all the light had slowly leaked out over decades. She told me about the taps, the voices, the dreams. How her son changed overnight, whispering to the walls, drawing figures with no faces. She showed me a photograph of him age 7 in front of that same hallway mirror I passed every day. Only there was a shadow behind him, not a person. Not quite. My husband thought it was stress, she said. I thought it was grief. But when my son disappeared from his room one night, we left the next morning. No bags, no goodbyes. She gripped my hand as I stood to leave and whispered, "Don't let it know your name." I didn't understand then, but I remembered. That night, I took every mirror in my apartment and turned them to the wall. Something about that photo made it feel necessary. I unplugged electronics, slept with the door open and lights on. Yet, sleep never came, because that was the night I heard my name. Clear, soft, dragged out in a voice that was not human. It came from the wall. Not a whisper, but a rasp. La, it groaned. That wasn't possible. I hadn't given it to anyone. Not even Anna, but somehow it knew. I bolted upright, heart a hammer in my ribs. I grabbed my phone to record it, desperate for proof, but the screen refused to unlock. It flashed, glitched, and then shut off. A chill ran through the air like the room had dropped 10 degrees. I pressed my back against the farthest corner, watching the wall with wide eyes. Then 3 knocks. Slow, even. From inside 3A. But the apartment was still empty. Or was it? I didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. I left town, stayed with a cousin who didn't ask questions, but noticed I flinched at every creak in the floorboards. When I returned, I half expected everything to be back to normal. But the minute I walked through the door, I saw it. The notebook, the one I'd been keeping by my bed, lay open on the coffee table. Pages flipped. My entries were written. My words altered. Where I'd written, heard the tapping again at 2:17. It now read, he replied to my rhythm. Other notes were crossed out entirely, replaced with phrases I'd never written. The wall remembers. I let him through. He is kind when not afraid. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. This was no longer just observation. It was interaction. I tried to burn the notebook. I tore the pages, threw them into the kitchen sink, lit a match. But the flame refused to catch. Paper that should have ignited instantly just blackened at the corners, curling like dried leaves but never consumed. I doused it in lighter fluid. Nothing. It was like the pages were wet with defiance. That's when I realized I wasn't being haunted. I was being taught, groomed, even, slowly drawn in like prey who mistakes curiosity for control. I began to dream in third person, watching myself sleep from across the room, walking to the wall, pressing my hand to it. Smiling. Whispers in foreign tongues filled my ears upon waking, their meanings clear even though I couldn't repeat the sounds. The message, though, was always the same: you belong. The building began to fall apart in strange ways. Water damage appeared on ceilings with no pipes above. Neighbors complained of rotten mold, but inspections found nothing. The elevator opened on floors no one requested. Tenants began moving out without notice, leaving apartments half-furnished like they fled mid-meal. I started keeping a journal online under a fake name, hoping to connect with others. That's when I found the forum. Thresholders. Net. Obscure. Hidden in layers of links and defunct subreddits. It was filled with entries just like mine. People from all over the world, describing identical symptoms, tapping from walls, whispers knowing their names, dreams turning into instruction manuals. One post caught my attention. It described a method called unbinding, a ritual to separate yourself from the entity, but it came with a warning: if you've already crossed the threshold. Unbinding only makes it violent, and I was desperate enough to try. It involved salt mirrors, reciting a sequence of numbers backward in candlelight. I followed every instruction precisely, closing every door, blocking every reflective surface. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a moment of silence. Maybe peace. What I got instead was fire. Not literal flames, but a surge of heat through the walls, the sound of something groaning deep below the floorboards, like tectonic plates grinding beneath skin. The candles blew out, and for 3 seconds, everything was black. Not night black, void black. When the lights came back on, my furniture had shifted. Only slightly, but enough. Enough to let me know I wasn't alone. On my bathroom mirror, in the steam I hadn't created, was a handprint. Long-fingered, smudged, still warm. I moved to a motel that night, but I wasn't free. The motel walls were thicker, but not thick enough. It came in dreams again, this time in the form of Mrs. Calderon. She sat in a chair, eyes soon shut, rocking back and forth. "You should have stayed on your side," she whispered over and over, as blood pooled beneath the chair and seeped into the floor. I stopped eating. I couldn't keep food down, not when it tasted like dirt and ash. My skin began to pale. I avoided mirrors, electronics, even my own reflection in puddles. Nothing helped. The entity had a hold, and worse, part of me didn't want to fight it anymore. Then the maintenance man died. Robert. Kind, middle-aged, always wore the same green overalls. I'd seen him dozens of times fixing leaky pipes, resetting fuses. They found him in the basement, huddled against the boiler, eyes open, mouth stretched in a silent scream. No signs of trauma. No injuries. But on his chest, scratched in blood red script, were the words, and he told me his name. That's when the police started poking around, not because they believed anything supernatural, but because tenants were reporting too many coincidences. Power surges. Flickering lights. Pets going missing. I wanted to confess everything. Show them the notebook, the handprint photos, the entries I'd printed from thresholders. But I didn't, because I knew I was past help. And yet, the entity wasn't done with me. Not yet. It wanted to be seen. Heard, felt. I woke up one night to find my bedroom covered in symbols, thin lines drawn in ash across the walls and floor. My body was damp as if I'd been submerged. My lips tasted of salt. I stood shakily and stumbled into the living room. The lights wouldn't turn on. I lit a match. In its flickering glow, I saw her, Mrs. Calderon, standing silently in the corner, lips stitched shut with thread that looked too fresh, too wet. She lifted one hand and pointed to the wall. Not her wall, mine. A new crack had formed, thin, jagged, pulsing, and something inside that crack breathed, slowly, deeply. Waiting. Then she vanished, just gone. The match burned my fingers and dropped. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stared at the wall as the breathing continued. Measured, steady. And I knew then that the final threshold wasn't 3A. It was me. I had become the vessel, the replacement, the continuation of whatever legacy the apartment demanded. I should have run, should have left the city, the state. But it was too late. My name was no longer just mine. It belonged to the wall now. And the whispers, they'd stopped asking. They were instructing. In the next days, I wouldn't be Ella anymore. Not exactly. I'd still walk, still speak, still nod to neighbors in the hall. But behind my smile, the wall would be watching, breathing, waiting for the next listener, for the next knock, for the next whisper in the dark. And when that comes, I'll be the one speaking. Somewhere between losing your identity and accepting it, there's a moment. One that feels less like surrender and more like becoming. That was me, weeks after the wall claimed my name. Not gone, not erased, just repurposed. I still moved through the building like anyone else, but I no longer lived by time. The clock on my wall had stopped ticking, and I hadn't bothered to replace the batteries. Why would I? Time meant nothing when the wall spoke in pulses and the air shimmered with things no one else could see. I became attuned to subtleties others missed. The sound of plaster breathing, the way shadows pooled unnaturally around corners of my ceiling at night, the voice that spoke in low tones just behind the television static, not loud, not clear, but always there. Some might say I lost my mind, but I'd argue I simply started listening. The residents of the building began to avoid me. They said nothing aloud, but their glances lingered longer, sharper, like they were trying to memorize my face just in case. I could feel their fear, and it wasn't unjustified. I was changing. I saw it in the mirror one night. A glance caught unintentionally in the warped reflection of my darkened microwave. My eyes were darker, like the color had been drained. My skin looked waxy in places, like old paint peeling off wood. But I didn't flinch. I accepted it. The wall had chosen me, and there was peace in purpose, however grotesque it became. I started documenting again, but not in my notebook. It had become unreadable, pages filled with symbols that shifted when I looked away. Instead, I began etching things into my floor, under the rug, in chalk at first, then in charcoal, eventually with blood. Not mine, not always. Stray animals were drawn to me. Birds collided with my window and fell still. A raccoon died on my balcony, curled like it was sleeping. I buried none of them, and still, the wall grew hungrier. I heard it at night, scraping now, as if something inside was clawing, not out of desperation, but boredom. When I touched the wall, it trembled faintly beneath my palm, a reaction I once feared but now welcomed. Then came the visitor. He knocked at precisely 4:04 p.m., the hour of mirrored numbers when reality thins. He was tall, lean, dressed like a man from nowhere, brown coat, pale scarf, gloves that didn't match. He smiled as I opened the door, not with warmth but recognition. "You're further than I expected," he said. His voice was wrong. It echoed slightly, like it came from the bottom of a well, and my knees weakened. "Who are you?" I asked, already knowing I shouldn't. You asked the wall for truth. I'm what leaks through." He stepped in without permission, his shoes leaving no wet marks on the hardwood despite the rain outside. He walked straight to the wall and placed both palms against it. "It's ripe," he said, "but still growing." I didn't speak, I couldn't. My mouth felt soon shut. He turned to me, eyes like frostbitten glass. "The woman before you resisted. That's why she ended broken. You've accepted. You might last longer." I tried to move, to scream, but my body was still. "You're the first in decades to open a crack. But the goal isn't opening. It's merging." Then he did something I'll never forget. He pressed his lips to the wall and whispered something in a language that made my nose bleed. He vanished as quietly as he arrived. No sound, no wind, no door closing. Just gone. That night the wall grew flesh. I'm not exaggerating. I awoke to a smell like rotting meat and found a section near my radiator slick, pinkish, veined. It pulsed with every breath I took, mirroring my chest's rise and fall. I didn't scream. I watched it. The message was clear now. It didn't want my attention. It wanted my cooperation. And so I gave it. I stopped going outside. I boarded my windows. I lived by the rhythms it set. When the tapping came, I tapped back. When the breathing accelerated, I paced to calm it. When the lights flickered, I hummed the melody it liked. The one I'd heard through the wall when Mrs. Cauldron was still here. I'd become its caretaker, its host. Then something unexpected happened. A new tenant moved into 3A. I watched from the peephole as she arrived, a young woman, no older than 25, dragging 2 suitcases, a cat carrier in one hand. Her name was Celeste. I knew this because she said it to the landlord twice, with confidence. I remember flinching when I heard it like she'd said a curse aloud. She was chipper, energetic, completely unaware. I tried to warn her. I wrote notes, left them taped to her door. Don't sleep in that room. Keep the lights on. Don't speak to the wall. She never responded, probably thought I was crazy. I suppose I was, but that didn't mean I was wrong. On her 3rd night, I heard her scream. It was the kind that shatters glass inside your head, raw and full of ancient terror. I ran to her door, banged until my fists bruised. She didn't answer, but I heard movement, not hers. Something dragging, something wet. I fell to my knees, pressing my ear to the wood, and I swear to whatever gods still bother listening. I heard the wall laugh, not loudly, but mockingly. I stood up and went back to my apartment. There was nothing I could do. The moment she said her name out loud, the wall had taken notice, and once it notices, it never forgets. Celeste wasn't seen again. Her mail piled up. The cat, however, appeared in the hallway one night, soaked, shivering, and blind in both eyes. I brought it in. It never stopped meowing. Never once. Always facing the wall, always mewing. It died 5 days later in its sleep, mouth still open, as if still trying to warn something. I buried it under the floorboards. That same night, the man in the coat returned. Only this time, he didn't knock. He stood at the foot of my bed when I awoke. "You've done well," he said. "Only one more step." I tried to ask what he meant, but my mouth was full of soil. I spat, coughed, and when I looked back, he was gone. But in his place, resting on my nightstand, was a cassette tape. No label, no explanation. I hadn't owned a cassette player in years. I found one at a thrift store across town, paid in cash. The clerk didn't look me in the eye. When I played the tape, I expected a message, a warning. What I heard instead was my own voice, reciting events I hadn't lived yet. "She'll arrive at dusk, dragging the red suitcase. She will scream on the 3rd night. The cat will die 5 days later." It was prophecy, and I was its mouth. I rewound the tape, played it again. This time the voice said something new. The wall must feed, but the vessel must choose. I didn't know what that meant. Not until the maintenance crew arrived, 3 of them. New hires, young, loud, oblivious, fixing a pipe behind the shared wall between 3A and 3B. One of them, Jason, stood too close. I remember watching from my peephole as he placed his hand on the wall. He flinched, pulled away. "Dude, it's warm." I heard him laugh. That night, he vanished. His coworkers said he left early. The manager found his clothes folded neatly in the stairwell the next morning. And scratched into the concrete floor was one word, ACCT. I stopped resisting the wall after that. I helped it when it asked. I played the cassette every night, listening for instructions. I fasted when told. I slept only when commanded. And still, I was rewarded with knowledge. It showed me memories not my own. Mrs. Cauldron as a girl, whispering to shadows in her closet. The tenant before her, sketching blueprints with runes baked into the margins. An older man from the 1950s, nailing crucifixes into the floor only to tear them out weeks later. It wasn't the wall that was haunted. It was the building. The wall was simply the mouth. Then came the invitation. A knock, softer than a leaf falling. I opened my door. A letter lay on the floor sealed with red wax. Inside, coordinates, a time, a final choice. No name, no signature. I packed nothing. I followed it without question. I arrived in an abandoned industrial site 2 towns over. There, in the middle of a collapsed silo, was a door, just standing alone. Behind it, I knew, was the source. The wall was a seed, the door was the root, but I didn't walk through. Not yet, because standing beside it was the man in the coat, smiling, silent, waiting, and in his hand, my name etched on parchment smoldering, waiting for me to take it back or burn it forever. I didn't take the parchment. My fingers hovered over it, twitching with anticipation, but something ancient and instinctual rooted me to the ground. Behind that door was more than answers. It was the origin, the wound, and the man in the coat. He wasn't smiling anymore. His expression had shifted into something far worse than anger. Patience, as if he knew time no longer mattered, because eventually I'd cave. Eventually we all do. He didn't speak, just tilted his head slightly, offering the burned edges of the parchment toward me again. I stepped back. I remember the wind shifting in that moment, the soundless wind that didn't move a single tree or ripple my coat. But I felt it, like breath from an open mouth. The door pulsed once, just like the wall, and then went still. A warning, or a beckoning. I turned and walked away. The trip back was quiet, too quiet. No cars, no birds. My phone was dead, though I hadn't touched it. My watch displayed a time I was certain had never existed at 1366. I tried not to look at it again. When I returned to the apartment, everything was wrong. My key slid in too easily. The door opened before I turned the knob. Inside, the furniture was where I left it, but different, angled toward corners that didn't exist. The walls had expanded, subtly. A doorway that used to lead to the bathroom now opened into a second living room that I never had. And in the center of that room, on a pedestal made of fused limbs and bone, was the cassette player. The tape had changed. The reels spun in opposite directions now. I pressed play. Static, then my voice again, but altered. Thicker. Slower. You denied the root. You refused the truth. You delayed the blooming. Now you must feed it yourself. The tape ejected violently, flinging across the room. It struck the window and shattered it, though no glass hit the floor. The window just opened into black. I stumbled backward, tripping over a new couch that hadn't been there before. My home had become a funhouse built by nightmares. Then the lights went out. I didn't panic, not in the traditional sense. By now, fear had become part of my bloodstream. I moved by instinct, feeling along the walls, waiting for the pulse. It came, faint, just left of the kitchen doorframe. I pressed my palm against it. It accepted me. The wall rippled slightly beneath my touch, and then I felt the cold draft, same as before, the one that shouldn't have existed. The wall whispered again, but now in fragments of memory not mine. A woman sobbing, a child laughing, a man pleading in a language I didn't recognize, a chorus of regret sewn together like patchwork ghosts. And then my own name, repeated, not as an identity but as a command. Ella! Ella! The apartment began to decay around me rapidly. Mold crawled up the walls in seconds. Wallpaper peeled like dead skin. Light bulbs exploded in dusty puffs. The floorboards bent with every step, as though someone was crawling beneath them. I heard thudding from Thuria again, but that door had remained locked since Celeste vanished. I moved toward it, drawn like a moth to flame. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. Cold, metallic, vibrating with something sentient. I opened it slowly, and 3A was no longer 3A. Inside was a perfect replica of my childhood bedroom. The stuffed bear I lost at age 6 sat neatly on the pillow. The posters I tore down at 13 were back up, edges curled with time. The window looked out onto the street I grew up on, complete with the cracked lamppost and the blue station wagon my father drove. But none of it was real. It was a memory animated by something that had no right to possess it. I stepped in, and the door shut behind me without a sound. The room darkened, not like a bulb going out, but like the sun itself had blinked. And then the figure appeared, sitting cross-legged on the bed. A woman, middle age. Eyes empty, lips sealed with black thread. She opened her mouth slowly and the thread tore as if made of spider silk. "Why didn't you stay gone?" she asked, her voice layered with others. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt soon too. She stood and took my hands in hers. They were ice. "It was dormant," she said. "You brought it back. Your attention, your obsession was the ritual. You kept feeding it." I shook my head, but she only smiled. "That's how it works. You think it chooses you. But really, you chose it. With every knock, every glance at the wall." She reached toward the ceiling, and it peeled away like paper, revealing an endless vertical tunnel of teeth and bone and blinking eyes. "It's not a presence. It's a pattern. A design etched into the soul of this building. It needs one of us. Always. And now," she pressed her palm to my chest. "It's you." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The floor melted beneath me, turned to slick mud that pulled me down slowly, deliberately. My last glimpse of the room was the woman waving, not sadly, but with relief, as if finally passing on the sickness to someone else. The world turned black again. When I awoke, I was back in my apartment, but I wasn't alone. He stood by the window, the man in the coat. His face was no longer neutral. It was joyful. "No, you understand," he said. "You've merged." I staggered to my feet. My bones felt out of order, like they'd been reassembled hastily. I looked down. My veins were darker, thicker, Like ink, I stumbled to the bathroom mirror and forced myself to look. My face was still mine, but softer, translucent at the edges. My reflection moved just slightly out of sync. When I raised my hand, it hesitated before following. It wasn't just a haunting, it was a replacement, a rewriting. The entity hadn't taken me, had duplicated me. And then, the realization. I hadn't left the silo. I was still there, still standing before the door. This entire sequence, my return, the decay, the woman in the bedroom. It was the choice playing out. A trial. A test. The door pulsed again. The parchment still smoldered, and the man, now closer than before, whispered, "Choose or rot between." The words were ice. I understood now, if I didn't take the parchment, I would remain in this loop forever. A waking dream stitched from fear and regret. But if I took it, I wouldn't just pass through the door. I would become what waited behind it, the new voice, the new whisperer. I reached out. But not for the parchment. I grabbed the man. His eyes widened. For the first time, I saw fear there. I pulled him into the door. The world imploded. No sound, no light, no sensation, just spiraling void. And then, stillness. When I came to, I was lying in my bed. Sunlight streamed through the window. My clock read 7:14 a.m. Birds chirped. Distant traffic hummed. My apartment was normal, clean, quiet. For a moment, I believed it had all been a nightmare. But as I stood and toward the hallway mirror, I saw him, the man in the coat. Not in reflection, inside my eyes. Just for a second. Smiling, and then gone. But now, every time I blink, I see the door. For 72 hours after I saw him in my eyes, I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't. My body begged for rest. But because I was terrified of what I'd dream. Every time my eyelids drooped, the image of the door resurfaced, standing alone in the middle of that endless, rusted silo, humming like it had lungs of its own. I kept checking the mirror, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But on the third day, I noticed something subtle. My pupils weren't reflecting light anymore. They absorbed it. I ran tests like a lunatic, shone flashlights into my eyes, stared directly at sunlight through lenses, compared photos. In every new image, I looked grayer, washed out, fading from the edges inward. My skin was still warm, my voice still mine, but the color had started draining out of my world, like someone had nudged reality into grayscale. Then came the knocking again. Not from the wall this time, from inside my closet. 3 short raps, the same rhythm as always, but this time I felt it through the soles of my feet. I backed away, whispering nonsense to myself like a mantra. My apartment had become a maze. Each room felt like a copy of itself, slightly rotated or rewritten, like someone had reconstructed it from memory and missed a few details. My bookshelf had 7 shelves now. I only remembered 5. My bed's headboard was rounded instead of flat. The scratch on my kitchen counter, the one I made myself when I dropped a knife, was gone. And the worst part, none of this frightened me the way it should have. That was the true horror. I was adapting. The closet knocked again. I knew what would happen if I opened it. I'd seen it before, in dreams I never remembered fully. A world with no walls, only endless corridors and mouths where doorknobs should be. But I also knew it would keep knocking until I answered. That's how it worked. Ignoring it gave it strength. Obeying gave me time, so I stepped forward and turned the handle. Inside, there was no closet. Just a tunnel of pulsing brick and stretched skin, a throat disguised as architecture. It yawned forward into a thick, pulsating dark. The air smelled like memory, old perfume, birthday cake, cigarette ash. I stepped inside. The floor was warm. The tunnel closed behind me with a squelch. I didn't scream. I kept walking. The tunnel changed as I moved. Sometimes narrow, sometimes cavernous. At one point I passed a mirror embedded into the wall like a tumor. In it, I didn't see myself. I saw Celeste. Hair wide, tapping against glass with both hands. She mouthed something over and over, "Don't let it use your name." Then her image fractured, split by cracks that bled ink. I kept walking. Eventually I reached a door. Not the door from the silo, but similar. Older, rotten wood held together by pulsing veins. A peephole stared back at me, breathing. Beneath it, a nameplate, E. Calderon. I blinked. The name shifted, E. Mo RSRs. Blink. Then, AR. VL. My name. I touched it and the door clicked open. Inside was an empty apartment. Unit 3A. Not the haunted, decaying version, but clean, perfect, live-in. Sunlight poured through lace curtains. A kettle whistled on the stove. A rocking chair swayed gently, and seated in it was me. Or at least, the version of me the wall remembered. She looked up, smiled. "You took long enough," she said. Her voice was mine, but warmer, steadier. She gestured to the chair opposite. "We don't have much time." I sat down because there was no other choice. She explained everything in a tone like a teacher explaining basic math. The building doesn't house people. It houses memory. It needs one anchor at a time. Someone to keep the pattern alive. She folded her hands. Mrs. Calderon tried to resist. She went mad. Morales gave in too early and vanished into dream. You've balanced better than most. But the balance can't last. I swallowed. What me? I asked. She chuckled. Because you believed the wall before you believed yourself. That's all it takes. A crack in the mind. The rest seeps in. She leaned forward. You're the anchor now. But an anchor alone isn't enough. It needs amplification. She raised a hand. The walls shimmered, then peeled away like skin. Behind them, dozens of versions of me. Sleeping, screaming, writing, dying, each frozen mid-moment, like mannequins in glass. Every path you didn't take is still watching, and they all lead here. My heart raced. I felt it in my throat. My double stood. If you leave now, the pattern resets. The wall chooses another, likely someone younger, innocent, maybe a child. The knocking will start again. She stepped behind me, whispering into my ear. Or you can stay. Complete the merging. Become the whisper. Spare them. I looked at the door. It was gone. Only a mirror remained, one last reflection of my tired, colorless face. I turned around. The other me had vanished. The apartment was quiet. Still, a decision lingered like smoke in my lungs. I raised my hand toward the mirror and pushed. The glass rippled. I fell through. I woke on the floor of my own apartment. My real apartment. The door was open. Morning light spilled in. I stood slowly, dizzy, atching, and looked around. Everything was back to normal. No extra shelves, no wrong textures. My scratch on the countertop was back. My watch ticked normally, 7:15 a.m., a minute later than before. Had it all been hallucination? A psychotic break, a prolonged nightmare? Then the phone rang. It hadn't worked in weeks. I answered. A voice I didn't know whispered, "Thank you." Then hung up. That day, someone moved into 3A again. A man this time, middle-aged, bald, quiet. Kept to himself. I watched him through the peephole. He looked up at me once, just once, and smiled in a way that made my stomach knot. Later that night, I heard him tapping, only once. No rhythm, no meaning, just a single knock. I didn't respond, because I knew what it meant. The wall had been fed. The cycle delayed, but not broken, and somewhere far below you the door was still breathing. 3 months passed. The man in 3A never spoke to anyone. Not in the halls, not on the stairs. Not even when the elevator broke and he had to walk past 5 people with grocery bags and sympathy in their eyes. He would just nod, polite, vacant, detached like a placeholder in human skin. I tried to tell myself it was over, that the wall had taken what it needed, digested the storm, and gone back to sleep. But there were signs, quiet, subtle, maddening signs. The clock in my kitchen ran 5 minutes fast no matter how often I reset it. My bedroom window fogged every night, even in summer. And sometimes when I walked past a mirror too quickly, I saw myself still seated in that rocking chair from 3A, eyes open, lips moving, murmuring something silent and rhythmic. I stopped trying to record it. Audio failed, video glitched. The entity, whatever it was, existed just outside the measurable, surviving in that awful space where belief and delusion blur. I knew better than to try fighting it anymore. Instead, I studied it. I kept a log scribbled in code I'd developed myself. Letters rearranged, symbols inverted. Not to hide it from others, to hide it from it. Because the more I thought about it, the more I was certain it was listening not only through walls but through thoughts. It didn't need ears, it needed attention, awareness, and I was still giving it plenty. Sometimes I caught the man in 3A standing at his peephole, not moving, just watching. I never saw him blink. I think we both knew what we were now, not victims, not survivors, but custodians. 2 parts of the same broken law, one to remember, one to forget. But something else began happening. The building changed. Not visibly, not to anyone passing by on the street, but the angles inside shifted. Hallways grew longer at night. Doors didn't line up like they used to. The buzzing light above the stairwell no longer flickered. It pulsed, like it had a heartbeat. And the neighbors, one by one, they moved out or disappeared. It was hard to tell which. Mailboxes stayed full. Shoes collected dust outside doors. Even the building manager, a fixture here for nearly 2 decades, stopped showing up. I found his master key in front of my door one morning. No note, just the key and a single black feather resting beside it. I didn't touch the feather, but I did take the key. At first, I did nothing with it, just kept it hidden. But as the days passed, the walls began to ache again. I know how insane that sounds. How can a wall ache? But when you've lived with one that breathes and whispers and remembers, you learn its moods. It wasn't content anymore. It was waiting. And not for me. For the new one. One night, just before midnight, I heard the knock again. Not from the closet. Not from the floor. From inside the bathroom mirror, 3 short taps. I approached slowly, flashlight in hand. My breath fogged the glass. The light flickered. Behind the reflection, just for a fraction of a second, I saw her. Celeste. Hair dripping, face pale, eyes stitched shut. She mouthed something again. "Don't let it forget you." Then she vanished. My reflection returned, but distorted, as though viewed through warped glass. I knew what it meant. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about continuity. The wall needed memory. A chain of witnesses. And if the man in 3A wasn't enough, it would come for me again. That night, I used the master key. I waited until I knew he was asleep, or pretending to be. 3 was silent. Still, the air inside was humid, sweet, like cut flowers beginning to rot. I stepped in and closed the door behind me. The layout was familiar but rearranged. The kitchen was now where the bedroom should have been. The bathroom had no sink, only a mirror that reached floor to ceiling, pulsing gently like lungs. And on the wall above the mantel, a photo hung. Of me, not from my phone, not one I'd ever posed for. I was standing at my own window, eyes closed, hands raised toward the sky. I don't remember doing that, but the wall did. I found the man sitting cross-legged in the center of the living room. No lights, just darkness and a circle of salt around him. He looked up slowly as I entered. "You took too long," he whispered. His voice was dry, used up. "It's hungry again." I didn't answer. I sat down across from him. The salt burned my skin as I crossed it, but I didn't flinch. I thought I stopped it. I said eventually. He shook his head. "You delayed it. But it's always been growing. Long before you. Long before me. It's not a spirit. Not a demon. It's architecture, built into the walls, fed by attention, strengthened by fear." He paused, and for a moment I saw something human in his eyes. "We made it stronger." He told me the truth, or at least his version of it. That every building hides a truth in its design, a shape, a purpose beyond shelter. Most remain inert, forgotten. But some, like this one, are remembered, loved, feared. These emotions stain the wood, warp the walls, give rise to something more, something alive. He called it the imprint. And this building, it was a cathedral of memory. Every scream, every secret, every tear shed within it counted. And we were the priests. He stood and held out a knife. "We have to choose," he said. "Let it consume someone new or feed it the past." I knew what he meant. A blood sacrifice. A ritual. Memory made flesh. But I couldn't do it. I refused. He saw that in my face and smiled. "Then it chooses for us." He stabbed himself in the chest, slowly, without resistance. His blood hit the floor like ink, soaking the salt, and the walls sighed. Yes, sighed, like they had waited centuries for that offering. The mirror in the hallway cracked. The floorboards groaned. And then I saw it, crawling from the shadows like smoke turned solid, a shape. No form, just movement. It approached the man's body, touched his face gently, then entered. His eyes flew open, but they were black now, glossy, empty. He stood up, laughed once, and walked into the wall. Not through a door, into the wall, like he belongs there. And I was alone again. I should have fled. Moved, burned the building down. But I stayed, and the wall began to rebuild. Not just physically, it recruited. Tenants returned, or appeared, smiling, unaware. I saw a child drawing symbols in chalk on the stairs. A woman singing lullabies that echoed backward. A man walking through the halls with no shadow. They didn't question they belonged. I, too, began to forget. Names faded. Time warped. I couldn't tell which memories were mine and which the wall had planted. I stopped writing. I stopped caring. The mirror showed me other faces now. Variations of myself, some smiling, some crying, one staring directly at me, lips moving as if trying to break through. And then, one morning, I awoke to silence. No taps, no whispers. Just a note on my pillow, scrawled in my handwriting. "It's done." I walked into the hallway. Every door was gone. Only one remained at the end of a corridor that never existed before. It was black, tall. Breathing? The real one. The choice again. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity. Then I opened it. Inside was a single room. Empty. And a wall. Not cracked. Not bleeding. Just a wall. And on it, etched in deep, beautiful script, was my name. Below it, one word, Anchor. I sat down. I smiled, and I whispered, "Let them knock, because the story always needs a listener." And now, I am the wall. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.